Hello? Hello? while Gemma congratulated the victors, and they all cheered on the platform, roaring with approval. "Appreciate it," I told Andy. "I'm gonna need it." Chapter 3. A few hours later, I found myself seated at a table with Andy while the smells of fine dining danced around the room. My nose followed the trail of a well-seasoned steak, dressed in crisp green chives. There was a platter of fresh ruby-red tomatoes beside it, swimming in a bed of lettuce. Cheeses of various imports were chopped and prepared in fine platters. An entire dish of chicken parmesan sandwiches caught my eye, as they were made with garlic knots. I watched as a blonde woman plucked one from the table and then split it open so that the melted cheese inside stretched outward. She was the same woman I'd seen duplicated on the obstacle course that morning. She smiled when she noticed me watching her antics, and walked over with the sandwich on a plate. Bowing slightly, she kept the plate balanced on her palm. "The name is Adelaide Jones, sugar," she said. "You can call me Adelaide if it pleases you. You must be that Nick Gadion that's got Gemma all flustered. You'll see a lot of me around here." Gemma's flustered? That was news to me. She'd seemed rather focused on her duties as an instructor. We hadn't spoken 2 words since Andy and I broke the record on the obstacle course. Adelaide rolled her pretty green eyes and waggled a finely manicured nail at me.
are you just here to chat? Hello again. I've been hearing about all you've done for this city. People are talking. We've all lost so much since the Red War. But we...
Eververse is at your service. Come see me again, Guardian.
Hi there. All done, all done.
bringing in a fortified mining lander. I believe this means a resource grab.
Hey, you! Clear out!
I'd expect a Cabal mining expedition to be heavily armed. Be careful.
Got that ship. A black eye for them.
I heard those explosions from here. What was that?
Oh, just us taking out a mining lander, a ship, and a commander.
As you do. I stand in awe.
Life is a delicate thing, Guardian. Hope, faith, love. In an instant, they're gone. Everything you've sworn to protect is lost. And all you're left with is silence and shadow, and the knowledge that you should have done more. Could we have defeated Gaul if the Traveler hadn't awakened? And what of the next threat? Or the next? What then? The Traveler is awake, and the age of legends is upon us. In the shadow of the light, our universe is a beautiful, terrible place. Where I once saw miracles, now I see monsters. Someone has to. We have to. That's what a Guardian does.
Guardians aren't supposed to investigate their past. That's the rule. But I'm not good with rules. Not when there's this much at stake. The Clovis Bray tech in that building allowed us to colonize the system during the Golden Age. They sought to create peace for all humanity. Which is ironic, because they also built Rasputin, the single most powerful weapon in the solar system. Either way, it's all been entombed on Mars since the collapse, along with something far more terrifying.
Mars, the first place where humanity encountered the Traveler, home to the Clovis Bray Research Facility and lost wonders of the Golden Age. The ice caps have kept those wonders hidden for hundreds of years. But the return of the Traveler's light has sounded an alarm heard throughout the system, and perhaps beyond.
The Red War is over, but Gaul's forces, what remains of them, have been scavenging during their retreat. And now that warsats are falling out of orbit near Mars, the Cabal are headed there too. I'll plot a landing course. That's the private Vanguard channel.
Mayday, do you copy? Vanguard access code 030. Get away from my ghost, you frozen. Requesting backup. I repeat, I need backup down here.
This frequency is reserved for official Vanguard business. So look, whoever this is...
That's cute. You've got one of the uptight ghosts.
Uptight?
I'm uploading coordinates to a safe landing zone. Please hurry.
All right, but you're going to owe us for this one.
I wouldn't have called you down here unless it was absolutely critical. The most dangerous weapon in this system is on this planet, and an entire army of Hive is trying to destroy it. I need your help.
We've touched down on the surface of Mars, Guardian. What's your status? Are you safe?
For now, but there's a whole lot of not safe between us and the Clovis Spray facility, which is where we need to be.
What's so important there?
Orsats, like the one that almost hit you on approach, have been dropping out of the sky since I got here, which usually means only one thing.
Rasputin? The greatest weapon of the Golden Age you were talking about, but that's impossible.
Nothing is impossible where Rasputin is concerned. Meet me at the facility.
Never seen Hive like this before.
As far as I know, they don't exist anywhere but here.
It was ruby red and matched the color of her dress. "Of course, sweetie. All day she's been watching you with extra care. Practically biting her nails she was. I'd heard through the grapevine that she and Douglas rescued you as a boy from that terrible man. Kept in contact, did she?" "Yeah," I admitted with a slight flush to my cheeks. "She did. She connected me to some mentors that helped me learn self-defense while powerless. Checked in every 6 months, actually." What a sweetheart, that woman. Don't let the icy routine fool you. She really cares for her students. But listen to me ramble on. You have so many other people to meet. She set the plate down, then dug through her little black purse for a business card. She passed it to me with a smile. It read, Adelaide Jones, staff. Descriptive. "I take it you fill a lot of roles here at the Academy, Miss Jones?" Adelaide grinned at the idea of being referred to as Miss and tossed a hand at me. "Such manners, Mr. Gadion." Andy, who'd been distracted with a big slice of a beautiful velvet cake, glanced over and smiled a little secret thing. Adelaide returned it and then gestured at the business card I still carried. "You call me if you ever need a hand, all right? Any friend of Gemma's is a friend of mine." "I will," I promised, and pocketed the card for later. Adelaide wiggled her fingers in farewell and headed towards the staff table. Andy elbowed me with a grin. "Already schmoozing the staff, Nick? I like this plan." "Not on purpose," I smiled and gently elbowed her back. "Can't help it if I'm charming." Andy snorted and looked me up and down with a hunger in her eyes. "Among other things." I cleared my throat and looked around. Matt, Jack, and Kristen were seated at a table opposite us, and, by coincidence, in the perfect position to glare. Kristen and I locked eyes, and then she jabbed her brother with a spoon and pointed at me with it. Their whispers were quiet, but I already knew the content of what they had to say. I hated that there was nothing I could do to stop it. Andy caught my sour look, as well as who it was pointed towards. She wrapped an arm around me and pecked me on the temple, still the easy, loving soul I'd met earlier that day. "Fuck 'em," she spat, shrugging a little. "Let 'em bitch." I just wish I could stop that. Andy met my eyes. "Anyone who judges you based on hearsay and stupid rumors isn't worth your goddamn time. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about. You're not the only one who suffered a little discrimination, you know." I did a double take and studied Andy a bit more closely. Her arm was warm around me, but I could sense the shift in tension. A sudden, silent ghost in the space between us. I rubbed gently at the tense muscle between her shoulder blades, trying to be comforting. Her beautiful brown eyes, while still glistening with happiness, carried a trace of darkness in them. "I'm sorry, Andy. You're fantastic. Who would even..." Discrimination wasn't a word that I'd put to my own situation, but I wondered who had judged Andy unworthy of anything. She was nearly a better fighter than I was, and had easily smashed a record that had taken me years of training to even dare attempt. Add that to natural beauty and a smile that could light up even my father's mood, and it just didn't make any sense. She laughed at that, but her eyes cast down to the table all the same. "You're sweet, Nick." It was clear she didn't quite believe me. I tisked and poked her side with my finger. "I believe the word you used was bullshit. I'm a lot of things, Miss Stretchy, but a liar isn't one of them." She laughed again at the reference, and her smile persisted this time. I drank it in, happy to know that I hadn't pressed her too hard too fast. Still, she said nothing in response to my praise, and so I rubbed at the tension between her shoulders again. "Talk to me. Are you all right?" Yeah, I'm fine. It's nothing, Andy said quietly, though by her tone and somber expression, it was clearly anything but. Old history. I'm fine, really. It's stupid. I shouldn't have brought it up. Nonsense. I waggled a finger at her. We're a team now, remember? Team Nick. You beat up my demons and I beat up yours. She shook her head, but she was smiling again, and that's all I really cared about. She pulled me in closer, and the easy grace was back right where it belonged. I think I'd like to see that, to be honest. You're incredibly hot when you're kicking ass. I lifted a brow at her, intrigued. Is that so? Oh, yeah. She wiggled her eyebrows suggestively at me. Well, remind me to striptease next time. We both laughed, and she released me to snatch some hors d'oeuvres off the plate of a passing waiter. They were little crackers with fine pepper and cheese, and she passed me one before popping one into her mouth. God, she moaned, and the look of utter joy on her face was almost sexual as she met my eyes. Everything here makes my mouth all tingly. I smirked and passed her back the cracker she'd given me. She popped that one into her mouth like the first and giggled after swallowing it down. I ordered us some steak earlier, I said with a grin. Should be arriving soon. Good man, she smacked me on the shoulder playfully. Fine dining was something that my father loved when I still lived on the island. After pillaging the world and dominating its many economies, he'd taken to expensive luxuries like he was trying to prove a point. I'd rarely enjoyed dining with him, but his taste was well refined and hard to forget. I wondered if he'd be toasting me tonight with some aged wine, proud that I'd made it into the academy against all odds. No doubt he was watching from afar and already knew about the record I'd broken. His record. His and Icebringer's. Strange to think that they'd been lifelong friends since the early days of the academy. Word was the hero Judgment had been their mentor. I scanned the room and spotted him, a tall, ageless man with an ugly scar cut over his left eye. His real name was Ephraim Seidel. He had long, jet-black hair, dark eyes, and sallow skin. Frankly, he looked like Dracula. Considering that he'd been living for at least the last 100 years, he probably was Dracula. When he turned to look at me, sensing my attention, his scowl twisted the scar over his left eye. He grimaced in disgust and marched toward me. True to his name, Ephraim was obsessed about law and order. Like Gemma, he was ageless and had maintained that law and order for a very long time. My father rarely spoke of him, but when he did, it was with the tone of a boy who wanted so badly to impress what had become a father figure. Call me jaded, but I already knew that I was in for some disappointment. Gation, Ephraim spat. His voice was a smoker's gravel. I noticed your temper on the pyramid. Your father was quick to anger too. I glared back at him and didn't justify that with a response. Andy, however, had no such patience. Matt was spitting fire from the get-go. I heard you're his mentor. Maybe you should do something about that. Ephraim squinted at Andy like she were a beetle that he longed to crush under his boot. She ignored it and popped another cracker into her mouth. She crunched it very loudly just to annoy him. I put my arm around her again in a silent show of support and met Ephraim's eyes dead on while he tried to stare me down. After an eternity of this, I sat back in my chair and pretended I didn't care whatsoever. I don't know what you mean, Mr. Seidel, I said nonchalantly. I'm surrounded by all this amazing food and people I can call friends. I'm content. Yeah. Andy leaned into me and bobbed her head in agreement. Maybe you should go check on Matt. He's been giving us the evil eye all night long. Ephraim wasn't happy with my response, but there was little else he could do. He spun on his heel with a grunt of disgust and marched towards Matt's table to seize the boy and cart him off to some unknown corner. I didn't care to watch. Eric slid into the chair on my right and plopped a plate of various fruits on the table.
Was that Judgment? You make fast friends. You know, he's probably a vampire.
Not friends, believe me, I corrected. He was my dad's mentor.
Oh.
Eric startled. He glanced at Ephraim's back and then to Matt, who was busy explaining himself in nervous gestures.
I didn't know that. That's, yeah.
Eric seemed to hate the silence because I could tell by the way he twisted in his seat that he was itching for a brand new topic. Fortunately, the dinner that I'd ordered for Andy and I had finally arrived, and 2 plates of perfect Angus sirloin were set down in front of us. It came with garlic knots that burst with steam when I cracked one open, and savored the delicious texture of perfect bread within.
I knew letting you pick the meal was going to end up in my favor,
Andy crooned, clearly in love as she cut into the steak and found it just the right shade of pink. I carefully cut a piece and then let the meat linger in my mouth while the juices danced around and played a heavenly tune with my taste buds. I felt a rush of endorphins sail up my spine, and I sighed, settling back into my chair. It had been a long time since I'd had a good steak. Far, far too long. Wow, I said as I swallowed.
Wow.
Andy gestured at her own plate and grinned from ear to ear.
I know, right?
The 2 of us drowned in the flavors for a while, and I didn't even notice when Eric slid further to the right and someone else sat down beside me. It wasn't until she said, "Hey," that I jumped out of my own skin. I knew that voice, even if it had been years since I had last heard it. It was Kara. Kara Johnson was a childhood friend from years past, and a ghost of the life I'd long left behind. She had sharp blue eyes and vibrant red hair, and she was, well, she was a woman now. Apparently, people kept right on growing when they fell out of contact. Who knew? Hey, yourself, I said, wide-eyed. I'm sorry, I didn't see you at the trials. I had no idea. You're powered too? Kara smiled at my flustered expression and nodded slightly. She seemed nervous. She rubbed her palms on her knees and darted a glance at Andy and Eric on either side of us. Andy, of course, was a wonder at releasing tension.
Who's the cute redhead? She cooed.
Kara, she stammered. I'm, She wavered on the idea of friend, and I frowned at that. Did she think I'd be mad? Kara is my childhood friend. I carefully hugged her with one arm and waited until she accepted the touch before pulling her in fully. I smiled at her when she melted a little bit. It was strange to see her so tentative and nervous. She used to be a ball of constant energy. We haven't seen each other in years. Andy waved her arms like she was beckoning us to kiss, and for all I knew, maybe she was.
Well, time to catch up then.
It's been a long time, Nick, Kara began, shyly. I'm sorry I fell out of contact. I heard about the record you broke earlier. It sounds like you've been training hard. I have. I nodded and smiled again. Kara and I locked eyes, and it was hard to part once we did. I used to drown myself in them. They were a crisp, clean blue, and her hair, this fireball shade of red, my favorite color in the whole world. Still embracing her with one arm, I rubbed her other shoulder in a silent show of support. I'm glad to see you, Kara, I said with utter honesty. Same. It's been too long, she admitted. I released her a moment later and tentatively returned to my steak. Andy watched me slice it carefully, with a focus that was obviously not on the dish before me. My entire world had dwindled down to the heat of Kara's presence beside me, and the little smile she wore let me know that everything was all right between us. "You said you were childhood friends?" Andy frowned as her knowing brown eyes slid to Kara. It was Kara who explained the story. Before my mother died, she had been my neighbor and the best friend that I never quite admitted to having. She was the girl that would ask me to play house with her on a daily basis, even though it was clear that I hated the entire experience. She would demand that I treated her dolls with respect. I never did, of course. I'd beaten more than a few Barbies to death in boyish frustration, and tossed others into various filthy places, just for the look of devastation on her face. We would argue for a while, but it never really had any heat. She would always show up at my door the next day with a beaming smile and another game to play. As we grew, the games and conversations differed. That Valentine's Day, right before everything fell apart, I gave her a bouquet of wildflowers, each carefully picked because they matched the hue of her eyes. I had watched my father do the same for my mother, and her smile had been inspiring. Kara's smile wasn't quite the same after that. It was even better. "After your mother died, I fell out of contact. Your dad took you away to that island, so—" Kara gestured helplessly and then sipped a glass of wine she'd snatched from a roving waiter. Now I realized why she'd been so tentative. "Kara, I'm not mad that we fell out of contact. Believe me, I know how my dad is." "Sure," Kara said, not looking convinced. I poked her in the side with a roll of my eyes. "Stop that," I said with a grin. "I'm happy to see you. You're a sight for sore eyes, and I'm glad for the friends right now." "Yeah," Eric piped up. He gestured with a fist and eyeballed the Barber twins. They were subdued after Ephraim's interference, focused on a conversation with Jack and some other guy. "We're Team Nick now." "We kicked serious ass in the tournament," Andy added with a grin. She waggled her fork at Kara. "I bet you did too. You've got a mental power set, I take it?" "Yeah," Kara nodded. I actually broke a record, to be honest. Brad nearly had me for a bit, but I beat the crap out of him in the build phase." I had lifted a brow. "Brad?" She gestured at the guy the twins were speaking to next to Jack. "Some tool from Odavale. What with the way he's been glaring your way, I guess he's a fan." I shrugged and returned to the steak with a bit more gusto. Cutting a piece, I held the meat between my teeth and spat. "He can get in line. I've got a whole city's worth of them." Kara barked a laugh, and I was so glad to hear the sound that I couldn't help but stare. We locked eyes again, and I smiled her way. She reflected it back and finally eased a bit. "Anyway, my power set revolves around technology," she said. "You give me a cell phone, I can turn it into a laser gun." Eric's eyes lit up, and he immediately dug deep into his pockets. He handed her his phone, and Kara smiled at his excitable nature. "Show me," he squealed. Please, I'm curious." Kara took the phone with a gentle sigh. Her red bangs fell in front of her eyes as she focused on the phone, which began to shift and mold in the palm of her hand. The hard plastic cover went flat and circular. The internal parts reassigned themselves to other roles, and the screen condensed until it became a glowing disc. A button appeared on the side, and when she pressed it, a hologram danced over the device. It was a layout of the current room. She spread her forefinger and thumb with a gesture, and the view widened to cover the entire academy, then to the district, then to the city. Eric was impressed. "A live holographic map?" She tipped her head and scrolled again rapidly until we saw the whole planet spin against a blanket of stars. I tapped into a satellite, she said like it was as easy as breathing. You can track anyone, anywhere. You're fucking with me, Andy said, her voice hushed and her eyes wide as hockey pucks. Nope, Kara said with a proud smile. That's impressive as hell, the blonde added. And really useful. Can you track my father with that? I don't know why I asked what I had, but the question was out before I could hold it back. Kara hesitated only a moment. Then she moved her fingers rapidly over the hologram until it was focused on the island I used to call home. It zoomed into the tall tower where my father worked, and a dot appeared, stationary, in what I remembered to be the dining hall. He's a dot because he's out of view of the satellites, she explained. But given estimations and reports, he's there. You're gonna save the world someday, Andy said, and reached around me to clap her on the back. It took you, what, 2 minutes to do something that everyone else has been struggling to accomplish for years? You're awesome. Kara ducked her head and blushed so vehemently she matched the color of her hair. With a gesture, the phone returned to its original state, and she passed it back to Eric, who carefully examined the phone in wonder, as if convinced it was going to start spouting holograms again. Mr. Saito was impressed when I showed him some other ideas I had, Kara continued. He asked me to keep working them and said that he was going to share some of my designs with Triton. I lifted a brow and glanced at the staff table. Mr. Saito? She pointed at an unassuming man in a suit and tie. I didn't recognize him, and she smiled and explained. Hero. You know, Mindbender. That explained why I didn't recognize him. He was a hero that worked through tricks and hallucinations from the shadows. He was a relative unknown compared to forces like Triton, but anyone who knew their hero history recognized how much good he had done in his career. Eric's eyes widened and bounced a little bit in his chair. Mindbender was the single reason we won the Battle of the Bay. Lord Inferno's been trying to find him for years. It was quite an honor, Kara said with a nod. She glanced at Eric and then cleared her throat again. I'm sorry. I don't want to be rude, but I didn't catch your name. Oh, I'm Eric. I'm Zappy. Eric twiddled his fingers, but no sparks appeared there. He shook his hands furiously and tried again, but still nothing. Well, I'm usually Zappy. Anyway, I just barely qualified to get in. I turned 18 last week. I thought you looked young, Andy said as she jabbed her fork Eric's way. A natural talent, my mom said, he said proudly. She's going to be so stoked when she finds out I made friends with a Gaddion. And I'm Andy, the blonde said with an easy smile. I'm stretchy, obviously. Nice to meet you, Kara. Kara laughed and shook her head. Stretchy, huh? That's what he said. Andy chuckled. I held up my hands in surrender. It's true, I did. She's lived up to the hype, too. We made a good team on both trials. Andy clapped me on the back, looking proud of herself. I chose well. You did, I reassured her. You'd still be on the other side of that bridge if it wasn't for me. Probably true. Andy settled back in her chair and huffed a little at the memory. The last part of the course required teamwork. I bet that was Triton's doing. He's always going on about it in his speeches, isn't he? Sure, but he's got a point, I said. We finished that tournament together. Without you and Eric to back me up, I'd probably be a smear on Matt's fist. Not true, Nick, Andy countered. You were holding your own against all 3 of them for a while there. Yeah, well, it doesn't count when I'm powered, I said humbly. I'll say, Andy grinned. You were fucking amazing. Flight, laser eyes, you breathed and caused a whirlwind for God's sake.
And then there was all that super strength. Matt can take a beating, apparently.
Kara followed my eyes to the man in question, and she lifted a brow. You mean cousin Matt? As in Matt and Kristen? I didn't think they'd hold a grudge. Andy lifted a brow at that.
Cousin?
Cousin-like, I amended as I shook my head. Last I saw them, they were teeny-tiny and obsessed with their mother. They visited every Christmas for a while. Kara nodded. We'd all celebrate with the Gadions. It was a pretty big affair for years. Yeah, until Mom was murdered and my dad went crazy, I seethed out. Kara's hand found its way to my back and rubbed it in slow, soothing circles. I shook myself and left the bitterness where it lay. Anyway, Matt's got it in for me. Kristen hasn't really spoken 2 words since we met on the course, but I don't think she's much better. She seems really focused on protecting Matt and backing up his insanity. He even brought up my mother in the final tournament. Blames me for everything my dad's ever done. Dude's convinced I'm going to turn into my dad or some such nonsense. I tried getting through to him, but he won't listen. He's
an idiot.
Andy cut in.
The only one in danger of turning into your father is him. I meant what I told Judgment. Matt's too angry. If he doesn't get a handle on it, he'll go villain by the end of the year. Mark my words.
I shook my head and glanced Matt's way again. We met eyes, and he scowled at me with such pure, utter hatred that I had to look away first. It's not that simple, I told the others. They've suffered a lot because of my father's actions. They lost their mother, too.
Welcome to the world, Andy shrugged. I'm sorry, Nick, but I don't have pity for people who attack first and ask questions later. Until he starts acting like a man instead of a little boy throwing a temper tantrum, I've got no respect for him. I won't waste time pretending otherwise.
Kara watched the exchange with a lifted brow. It sounds like things got pretty heated during the tournament. I'm sorry. For what it's worth, I agree. I think he's being stupid. Don't worry about it, I reassured her. I'm not going to lie, the hostility hurt, but I don't need their approval. I know where I stand with my father. I know what I want in life. The twins can fuck off. Andy cheered with a fist bump and clapped me on the back again.
That's the spirit. Fuck 'em. It's odd you're so obsessed with the idea that you'll turn into Lord Inferno.
Eric asked up, glancing over at the twins thoughtfully.
Like it's a bad thing. Inferno was the greatest hero in the world, saved millions before he flipped. He was even Triton's hero, did you know? Said that in an interview once.
Until he went insane, I muttered.
Sure,
Eric added with a shrug of his shoulders.
Your dad might be a menace now, but he saved my granddad's life once. We've still got some of his old posters in our attic. When I call you a Gadion, I don't mean in reference to the villain that's terrorized the world. He's not a Gadion anymore, Nick, but you are.
Of all the things I was expecting Eric to say, that wasn't it. I was oddly moved. He's slaughtered thousands, I pointed out. Whatever legacy he had, it's long gone now. Andy nudged me with her shoulder.
He has you, doesn't he? Eric's got it right. You're not your dad, but you can still walk in his footsteps without turning into a monster.
I suppose, I conceded. It twisted my heart to hear it, but it left a warm feeling to know that I was surrounded by people who believed that much in me. I just want to make things right. That's all. Kara hugged me and leaned her head on my shoulder. Stop fretting so much. You're going to develop worry lines.
And we can't mar that perfect face,
Andy chuckled.
He's too cute. It must be protected.
He is, Kara agreed. Even when he's pouting.
Especially when he's pouting.
I sighed, rolled my eyes, and then hugged them both. Thanks, girls. My tone was somewhat sarcastic, but it was all in good humor. I glanced at Eric and nodded his way as well. I appreciate it. At the staff table, Triton stood and rang his glass for attention. He waited until a hush fell over the tables, and all eyes were turned to him. Congratulations to the new students of Valcav Academy, he began. We've had 2 records broken today, and they will be marked in history for future applicants to conquer. Everything you do here will reflect upon future generations. Do not take the weight of that lightly. The year will be full of strife, and you will need to maintain a strong and steady course. But I know that each of you has the makings of a true hero. His eyes settled on me, and I stared back, butterflies dancing around in my stomach. It's up to each of you to define what that means. Finish your meals and rest well. Tomorrow we start bright and early on your new courses. Triton sat back down and immediately entered a hushed conversation with Gemma. I glanced at the 2 girls, then to Eric, and sighed. Goodbye, steak, I joked. Hello, homework. Andy was already standing, excited to get started. Time to kick ass. I'm gonna go check out the dorm. You coming, Kara? Kara's eyes lingered on me, and she shook her head. I'll stop by later. I want to catch up a bit more. All right, I'll find a good fluffy bed for you, the blonde quipped as she hurried off. Kara and I ended up talking far into the night, long after Eric left. By the time we were finished, the dark circles under her eyes had become quite evident. I eventually escorted her to her dorm, and she yawned and hugged me tightly. Good night, Nick. Good night, Kara. We didn't kiss, but I noticed the way her eyes fell to my lips. Instead of making contact, I nodded and headed back the way of the boys' dorm. She stopped me with a hand, drawing my attention back again. I never said it, but thank you for the flowers. The flowers? The ones you gave me before. Anyway, they meant a lot, so thanks. I smiled, and she smiled back. Her eyes could light up a black hole. I could die in them and be content. Maybe I'll get you more, I said. Red ones this time, to match your hair. She fingered a strand and blushed a little. I missed you, Nick. I'm glad you're here. I missed you too. Good night, Kara. Good night, Nick. Chapter 4. Eric. Eric, has everything been as you expected, honey? Are you settling in well? We saw that you were accepted. The dorm is big enough, isn't it? You can still come home, you know. Oh my gosh, Mom. I didn't mean to cut her off, but I was so goddamned excited. I couldn't believe the day I just had. It felt like I was sinking through the world because it wasn't real enough to sustain me anymore. The phone protested with static when I accidentally shocked it, and I winced, trying to calm back down again. Oh my gosh, I repeated. Honey, are you okay? Okay? Oh my gosh, Mom, I made friends with Nick Gadion. The Nick Gadion. You mean Junior, yes? She wasn't nearly so enthused as I was, but I loved that she humored me anyway. He's the son, right? Yeah, I can't believe it. Can you believe it? I can't believe it. I wasn't expecting to make friends at Volcav, let alone the acquaintance of someone like Nick. To be honest, I was dizzy even from the experience of attending the trials. I've been surrounded by so many talented people and so much history all at once. Superheroes and villains have ruled our culture for hundreds of years, and Alexandria had been home to the greatest of them all, again and again.
Before he passed away, Grandpa and I often wondered why that was. Perhaps there was some secret, supernatural nature to the city encouraging mutations in children, or maybe it really was down to chance. Whatever the case, I picked up where my grandpa had left off and dedicated my life so far to the study of heroes and all their achievements. It wasn't just a fascination for powered people, though that in itself was certainly a fun subject full of wonder. No, Grandpa saw our study as a quest into the purpose of human nature itself. For every amazing hero, there was a cruel villain to balance them. And some, like Inferno, rose to the heights of one side, only to tumble down into the depths of another. The Gadion name was considered a curse to most in the city, and even though we'd only just met, I could read the anxious little lights in Nick's eyes whenever he met someone new. He was always worried that curse would come to pass and punish him for deeds not even his own. It was bizarre to think that someone as powerful and talented as he was, with that incredible blood thrumming through its veins, would have to fight so hard just to earn the respect of his peers. My family felt differently because Inferno had saved our lives once, and that still mattered despite his tumble into darkness. Not that we advertised the fact, nor were we eager to see his takeover progress throughout the world. Inferno really had committed horrible atrocities, and many might not ever be forgiven. Still, it was hard to argue the dictator's point when his empire was clean, his streets safe, and his people cared for. Most didn't know that, but I was nothing if not a nerd. I did a lot of research. Inferno's people were happy, ridiculously so. My grandfather and I studied the Gadion case thoroughly when I was younger, and we both decided that everyone had a driving point that could be twisted if pressed hard enough. Someone had found that point in Inferno, and it was Nick who had largely paid the price for it. When I first met him, I maybe came off a bit strong. That happens sometimes. I know I'm pretty excitable. Nick's a legend in his own right, and there he was, eye to eye with me like it was completely normal. I had dedicated my life to studying people like his family, and I couldn't believe how lucky I was. Then the round started, and he was off climbing the walls like it was second nature. And I couldn't believe his raw talent either. He broke a record set by his father, and if that wasn't destiny calling, I don't know what is. Nick wasn't just strong in terms of latent power, he was smart too. Calculating, forgiving, good-natured, amazing. All the makings of a great hero, and I was already close enough to witness it happen.
You sound very happy, dear.
Mom's voice broke through my thoughts.
This is a pleasant turnaround from before.
I froze and immediately curled up where I sat on the bed in my dorm room. As ecstatic as I was a moment ago, I was suddenly nervous again. I'm trying, Mom, I muttered.
It sounds like this Nick is a good influence on you.
He's been through a lot more than me, and yet he's so unshakable. I just want to be good enough. I want to be like that, you know?
You are good enough, honey. I've been saying that for years.
I know,
Have you been going to your appointments?
Of course, Mom. Everything's already taken care of. I still can't believe my psychologist is fucking mind-bender. That's
language, Eric.
I rolled my eyes, but smiled anyway. Sorry, I'd give you a penny if I were there.
You owe me one when you visit, young man.
And I fell back on my pillows with a sigh and stared up at the ceiling. I felt like I was swimming. It was so hard to believe that today even happened.
I'm very proud of you,
my mother whispered.
I love you so much. Your father is also very proud. He's been watching the video of your trials all day.
5 months ago, I thought my life was over. My mother found me curled up in the cemetery, half delirious with fever. It was Grandpa's grave where I'd found solace. He'd been recently buried after several years of battle with illness, and I wasn't quite willing to let go. My mother was the only source of warmth that night, and it was all I could do to sink into her embrace. She wrapped me up in a warm blanket and dragged me home without a negative thing to say about it.
"You'll have good days too," she promised.
I really, really love my mom. It was then I decided that I wanted to make her proud. My parents and their parents before them were sweet, ordinary souls who never developed their own abilities. To be the first Powered in the family was to be buried under very high expectations. But I was ready to prove myself, and thus I trained hard for the next 5 months to earn the privilege to learn at Volcav. Now, I was here, and Nick freaking Gadion was my friend. I couldn't help but look up to him and the way he handled things so smoothly. He saw a challenge, and he conquered it. I wanted to be like that. "Life is crazy," I said. "I can't believe any of this is real."
"Believe it. You've done very well."
There was a part of me that nearly denied it. It would probably always be there, but I didn't have to give in anymore. I thought about what Nick would do and smiled instead. It was okay to be happy, I decided. If he could do it, so could I. "I know," I said confidently. The tone surprised even me, and I chuckled. My mother chuckled as well.
"You've got to bring this Nick guy to dinner sometime. He's clearly left a mark."
Yeah, maybe I will."
Chapter 5. The morning sun poured its rays over the various new students who sat at their desks and waited for class to start. Poor Jack had been assigned a modified, much wider desk to suit his massive brick body, and the Barber twins had joined him at the back of the room to keep him company. Brad, a guy as plain as his name suggested, seemed to be engrossed in some rant about the goings-on with the mental-powered students the previous day. I caught the name Kara and scrolled my eyes back to them, but I was met with 3 different scowls and decided to let it be for now. I leaned back in my chair, letting the sun bathe me with a contented sigh. To my left, Andy gently kicked my desk with her shoe. I cracked one eye open to meet her head tipped back and giving the twins a dirty look. "Problem?" I asked, curiously.
"He's saying that Kara cheated yesterday,"
Andy seethed as she turned her attention back to me. "They said I cheated too," I pointed out. "No one's taking it seriously. She'll be fine."
"The rumor still stands, though," she countered. "I'm just saying she deserves better. Brad seems like a real douche nozzle."
Kara slid into the seat on my left and then noticed Andy's grumpy expression. In a strange echo, she asked, "Problem?" Andy gestured to the crew at the back of the class. I sighed and shook my head in distaste. "It's nothing," I told Kara. "They're just upset that we all put them to shame on the score list. It's not worth the energy." Andy crossed her arms and pouted. I had to admit, I liked the way it pushed out her bottom lip as it glistened in the sunlight.
"Still don't like it."
"Welcome to college," I gestured with a sigh. "It's like high school, but deadlier." Both girls snorted. Eric joined us a moment later and settled into the seat behind me. He bounced in his chair like a child awaiting Christmas morning. His knee vibrated with frantic energy as he took in the class and then scanned for the missing teacher.
"Do you know what we're doing yet?"
he asked with that same energy.
"I heard it's a rescue course this semester. We're gonna save people." I can't wait.
Andy lifted a brow and crossed her arms. I think she was continuing the pout at this point, purely because she'd noticed me staring.
How'd you find that out? I get around,
Eric said as he stretched out his arms and pretended to be a cool cucumber. Unfortunately, his knee continued to bounce, and he couldn't sit still for 2 seconds without squirming. I chuckled at that. I'm sure you do. As we all settled down, I thought about what Eric had said. Rescue work. Every good hero struggled with priorities on the battlefield, but it was generally agreed that civilian life ranked highest on the list. I wasn't sure what was so important about dedicating an entire course to the subject. It seemed simple. If a life was in danger, save that life first above anything else. It wasn't that complicated, was it? Well, then again, my father had been one of the best, and he'd failed to rescue my mother. Not that I held it against him. Quite the contrary, I understood that sometimes shit just happened. He didn't, but that was another story altogether. I was stirred from my thoughts as Gemma walked through the door and set a folder onto her desk. She was wearing a low-cut beige dress, and her long black hair was tied into a neat ponytail. Her heels were black and professional. It was clear this was not friend Gemma, but teacher Gemma, and I'd be getting no favors for having some history. Despite the supernatural nature of her students, the classroom was a typical one, with a large blackboard and chalk set behind the teacher's desk. Gemma turned and wrote, "Favorite Superheroes," in big bold letters on the board. Her writing was strong, the letters stiff and precise. Setting the chalk back down, she spun on her heel and clapped her hands once for attention. She took a moment to look over the class and lingered on a few faces before speaking. When we met eyes, I smiled. She didn't smile back, but I could see a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. "As many of you know, my hero name is Amazoness," she began in a strong, clear voice. "You may call me Miss Corcoran. Gemma Corcoran, to be precise. I'll be your primary instructor here at Valcav for the next few years. I've already met each of you personally and am excited to see where the Academy takes you." She let that sink in before continuing. "This semester, you'll focus on rescues, and you'll be attending a rescue class over the next few months. Your primary rescue instructor will be City Master, also known as Lars Shoemaker. If you have any concerns about the class, speak to him." To their credit, even the barbers had their full attention locked on Gemma as she folded her arms over her stomach. "Now, some of you may wonder why you even have a rescue class, but rescuing a civilian life is never as easy as it sounds. Every villain has an unpredictable nature, and each understands that a hero will not waste their time in pointless combat while an innocent life is on the line. Villains will always try to use your morality against you. They will place you in positions where you may have to choose between loved ones and the fate of an entire city. The greatest names in history are those who understand how to navigate these difficult waters and save as many lives as possible." Her eyes lingered on me for a moment. Then she sighed and passed her gaze over the rest of the students once again. "For hundreds of years, heroes have walked among humanity and defended it from the worst evils. But to be powered is not to be a hero. A hero is a title that you earn, and to be powered is what you are. It does not entitle you to anything more than a duty that you may or may not accept in the years to come." I heard a tisk behind me and glanced back to see Brad with his arms crossed, a grumpy line furrowed between his brows. Gemma noticed it as well and gestured for him to speak with her manicured hand. "Is there a problem with that, Mr. O'Connor?" "Obviously," Brad sneered.
I'm not sure why it's my job to handle a bunch of normies. They've got police, don't they?
Sure. Gemma nodded, as she apparently ignored his blatant disrespect and hostility for the moment. The police clean the streets and protect it as best they can, but to fight a powered being is like fighting a nuclear weapon. Police have bullets and tear gas. Half of you are immune to them, and the other half can easily find a way around it. Even an untrained powered being is capable of destroying entire city blocks, given enough potential and persistence. It's not something that ordinary police can defend against, which is why there are heroes in the first place.
But why should I care about what happens to a bunch of losers?
Brad pressed. I rolled my eyes. Andy was right. Brad seemed like an asshole in every sense of the word. Keep talking like that and you'll be dangling damsels off skyscrapers in no time, I said.
Didn't ask you, Inferno boy.
Enough, Gemma interjected, with steel in her voice. Mr. O'Connor, talk out of turn again and I'll send you out on your ass. If you need a lesson on why it's important to save lives, perhaps I should phone your mother and determine the root cause. Brad paled at that. Everyone had something they feared, even an asshole like him.
No,
he squeaked.
I'm good. I'll shut up.
Gemma cleared her throat and gestured at the blackboard behind her, where favorite superheroes was still written. I hope you've been considering an answer to this statement. I don't just want to know who your idol is, I want to know why. She gestured at the back of the room again. Brad, since you've helpfully offered your opinions thus far, I assume you have someone in mind?
Nah, not really.
He shook his head. He was going to be obstinate for the rest of the year at this rate. I felt Gemma's irritation as she ignored him again, and then gestured to Brad's left. Kristen. At first, Kristen didn't seem interested in saying anything either, but Gemma waited patiently, in no mood to let her pass by unnoticed. I watched as Kristen straightened her posture, her lips twisted with an uncomfortable grimace. You already know what I'm going to say. She sighed and twisted her fingers in her lap. She didn't appreciate the dozen or so eyeballs glancing back at her with curious expressions. That may be so, but it's as good a place as any to start. Gemma gestured for her to spit it out. Kristen rolled her eyes and glanced at her brother, then sighed. My dad, naturally. Icebreaker, you mean? Gemma pressed. Yeah, Kristen replied, a little hesitantly before pushing on. He's retired now, but he's always been, a good guy. He's mine, too, Matt added as he locked eyes with me again. I was uncomfortable with the way he seemed so determined to hate me every chance he got. Gemma noted the tension with a glance, but kept right on going with the lesson. What's your favorite quality about Icebreaker, Kristen? Well, She struggled for an answer that wasn't, because he's my dad. Matt piped up next to her as he glanced at his sister with some pity. My dad doesn't fight anymore, but he did for a lot of years. Took a lot of beatings before he retired. Spent most of his time out in the field. I mean, we only saw him maybe once or twice a week. He sacrificed everything to make sure we were safe. You admire his persistence, then? Gemma asked with genuine interest. These were obviously the kinds of things she wanted to hear from us. Matt and Kristen both nodded. My mom liked to say that he... Kristen muttered something inaudible, and Gemma lifted a brow. What was that? She'd say that Dad was the most stubborn man on the planet, Matt cut in. He reached for his sister's hand and held onto it. He wasn't looking at Gemma, though. He was looking at me. I remember once he fought Lord Inferno for 3 days straight. Didn't sleep, didn't eat,
did nothing but hold them back. That was the Battle of the Bay some years back. Gemma nodded, turned, and addressed the class at large. Persistence, stubbornness. Icebringer is legendary in this regard. He was a partner to one of the greatest heroes ever known, and then opposed that hero for years after Inferno fell into darkness. He's retired now, as many of you are aware. Word is, he's settled somewhere in the Arctic. Quietly taking notes in the front row, Eliana raised her hand, and Gemma gestured for her to speak. Miss Corcoran, why did Icebringer retire? He wasn't that old, was he? Is, Matt corrected with no small amount of vehemence. Right, Eliana blushed. Is. The official story is that Icebringer suffered an injury, Gemma said, somewhat diplomatic. Unfortunately, Matt was in no mood to be. The truth is that after Nick's dad killed my mom, the fight sailed right out of him. He turned tail and ran a few years back. The room grew tense with that, and Gemma frowned. Tragedy marks every Powered family, Mr. Barber. We're all sorry for your loss. Eliana raised her hand again. Miss Corcoran, I don't understand. Did he flee or did he retire? If he fled, he's not much of a hero, is he? This caused Matt to lurch up out of his chair, and I twisted around, ready to interfere if he got violent. How dare! I don't mean any offense, I was just... Eliana pleaded, but Matt kept ranting at the poor girl. My dad's a hero. He fought so many villains, saved so many lives. There's a statue of him on the bay next to all the other greats. They don't build statues for cowards. Matt, that's enough. Gemma pressed firmly. She meant nothing by it. Slowly, Matt settled back into his chair. He crossed his arms and pouted like a child. A deeply troubled, angry child, but a child nonetheless. Eliana blushed an even deeper shade of crimson. I'm sorry. It's all right, sweetheart, Gemma soothed before growing serious once more. Icebringer is a hero in our history books, and he will forever be remembered as someone who sacrificed nearly everything to protect this city, as well as the world at large. If anything can be learned from his example, it is that one must be persistent in the fight against evil. It can take many forms, and will hurt you in any way that it can, so being prepared to fight at any cost is a good lesson to take home. It's one that Icebringer stood for, and one that he represented to the utmost of his ability. She swept her gaze over the class. I led the conversation toward Icebringer first, because I was born in Otavale. Icebringer saved my family. A hush fell over the students, and once again Eliana raised her hand. What happened in Otavale? I rolled my eyes. Everyone knew about Otavale. Lord Inferno seized the entire city, Gemma explained. It was the last one to join his empire, and it resisted the hardest. The battle went on for 3 weeks, and in that span most of the buildings were destroyed. We still don't know how many fatalities there were. Icebringer was the vanguard that led the attack against Inferno, and later, the rescue efforts. We lost that battle and eventually the entire city, but Icebringer refused to leave until every single innocent life that could be saved was given a chance. He single-handedly escorted many beyond the border, including my family. Wow, Eliana whispered. He kept fighting, even after the city was gone? As a hero will do, Gemma said with utter conviction. It's not about wins or losses, it's about how many you can save. Andy raised her hand. I glanced over and was surprised to see a nervous expression on her face.
She cleared her throat.
I'm gonna get a lot of hate for this, but my favorite is Inferno Before the Fall.
My heart skipped several beats, and I wasn't sure how to feel about that. Gemma was surprised, and so was Matt, apparently.
What?
He growled.
Why would you favor that psychopath?
Andy's shoulders tensed up the way they had yesterday, before every single fight. I was certain that a fist was going to fly across the room if Matt pushed her hard enough.
Well, he wasn't always a psychopath, now was he?
She shot back with fire in her tone.
He was good once. The best, even. I'm not saying he's forgivable now, not with what he's done, but that doesn't mean we should forget all the good he did, too.
I could see the steel forming in Eric's spine as he straightened up in his chair.
I agree. Inferno saved Volcav once. You remember, the fight against Laughing Mask? It was chronicled in the Best Heroes Edition 45.
And he saved my mom, Andy interrupted, though she smiled at Eric to ease the brunt of it.
If it weren't for him, I wouldn't even exist. My mom met my dad in the rescue party. My grandpa had all those posters,
Eric added. Matt growled and shifted in his seat. I caught fangs when he snarled,
He's a mass murderer. An evil fucking...
Language, Matt, Gemma warned as a frown formed on her lips.
No, he yelled furiously. This is stupid. You can pick anyone else on the list, but Inferno isn't one of them.
Matt crossed his arms, looking ready to explode.
Quiet down, Mr. Barber, or I'll be forced to send you out of class.
Gemma stared at him until he looked away, before turning her attention back to Andy. Ignore him, Miss Baker. She then gestured toward Eliana. What's your favorite?
Judgment, she said. I really like vampires.
Everyone else in the class snickered, and the tension immediately eased. I was glad for it, to be honest. Who knew hero history could bring up so much bad blood so quickly? Brad rolled his eyes.
He's not actually a vampire, you moron.
Brad, enough,
Gemma said, clearly done with him.
Act like an adult or you'll be leaving along with Mr. Barber.
Brad crossed his arms and glared at his desk, as Matt growled and did the same. Eliana blushed, but Eric piped up in her defense.
To be fair, we don't actually know if he's a vampire or not. Vampires don't exist, Brad said. You exist, Eric countered. I exist. Why not vampires?
It was obvious that Brad was embarrassed at how simply Eric had countered his argument, as he grumbled out.
Because it's dumb. He's not a vampire.
Gemma chuckled again and went back to the front of the class to lean against her desk. Is there another reason you like him, Eliana?
Well, he looks pretty cool when he's doing that shadow thing, she added.
Eric bobbed his head, apparently convinced.
Vampire.
Not a vampire,
Brad muttered.
He doesn't sparkle now, does he? Exactly.
Eric stuck his tongue out at Brad.
Totally a vampire.
If nothing else, I was proud that Eric was willing to defend a point. He's obsessed about law and order, I said, trying to change the subject. Wasn't he some kind of lawyer back in the day? Gemma shook her head. A judge, actually. Hence the name. Judgment toes a line that many heroes find very uncomfortable. He follows the law to the letter, even if it costs a life. There is a moral argument here that has plagued even the brightest minds for well over a century. A hero who fights outside the law is considered a vigilante, but sometimes a villain uses the law to manipulate a hero into breaking their oaths. Judgment refuses to break the law, even when provoked, because he believes that the law should be sustained, that order is necessary for the survival of society. I'm inclined to agree, of course,
But I also understand that the world doesn't operate in absolutes.
Judgment believes otherwise, Christian said, her voice low and uncomfortable. It was one of his first lessons. He says that working outside the allowance of the law makes you vulnerable to those who would use it as a weapon to hurt others. He claims there is no exception. Anyone who deals in absolutes isn't seeing the world very clearly, Andy argued. There are plenty of good people who fall outside the law, and they need saving too. Gemma watched the exchange with interest. I hadn't been sure about the intent of this entire class, but then I realized she'd simply wanted us to debate the delicate morality and come up with our own conclusions. There was no right or wrong answer to any of this, but the more we thought about it, the more prepared we'd be. That brings up an interesting point, Gemma said. If someone robs a bank and then falls victim to a powered villain, are they worthy of saving? Matt didn't even hesitate. He shook his head and spat, "No, he forfeited his life the second he hurt an innocent." Stealing money isn't the same as murder, Matt. Andy rolled her eyes. It's a life. I'd save them, sure. Judgment would as well, and then ensure the robber spent his time in jail. Gemma nodded with a thoughtful look. I believe you know this, Matt. He would not approve of your answer. Innocent life may be held in higher esteem than a criminal one, but it is a life all the same, and that matters. Heroes work to reform criminals. We do not leave them to die. Eliana raised her hand, and after Gemma's nod, she asked, What's the point in reforming a criminal when they're just going to do it again once they're free? No one knows that for certain, Kara spoke up. She glanced at me, then at Eliana. Anyone can be redeemed. Matt snorted at the very notion, and I knew exactly what he was thinking. I swore if he brought up my father again. I tend to agree, Gemma smiled. Criminals are often the symptom of a much bigger issue. Poverty, for instance, or political strife. Education and reformation go a long way to fixing these problems. Matt twisted in his seat like he wanted to jump out the window. But there are limits. You can't save everybody. You don't know that until you try, Matt, Gemma said firmly. But it's a waste of time. Matt's argument struck me as dumb. You didn't give up on people. Even my dad, if the right person did the right thing. Is it? Gemma countered, her voice an echo to my thoughts. Matt rolled his eyes. Yes, it is. Your mentor would disagree, Gemma reminded him. He sighed and glanced out the window. I wasn't certain if he was thoughtful or had just given up the ghost entirely. Gemma, I cleared my throat and stammered, Miss Corcoran, I mean, who's your favorite hero? Triton, she grinned. Should be obvious. He's been my crime-fighting partner for years. What do you like about him? I asked with genuine curiosity. Gemma glanced upward while she considered that. His creativity, she said eventually. He's good with water, but he doesn't use it in the traditional fashion. You see, most people when they talk powers, they prefer the big, fascinating kinds. Lots of fire, lots of ice, lots of pretty effects and bright, shining lights. But Triton is a good example of someone with a relatively tame power set who can take on nearly any opponent effectively. He's smart. You mean that body control thing he does? Eric bobbed his head and bounced in his seat. That thing is so cool. Gemma nodded. The human body, depending on age and gender, carries about 60% water. He learned how to use that to stop nearly anyone in their tracks. Obviously, it wouldn't work on someone like you, Mr. Riker. From the back of the room, I heard bricks shift as Jack pumped a huge fist into the air. Heck yeah! But it does indeed work on Lord Inferno, she added, who is very much of human composition. That's how Triton managed to secure the city.
and why he's everyone's favorite in the fight against Inferno's growing empire.
He's getting old, though, Eric said thoughtfully. That's the rumor, anyway.
He is, Gemma admitted. But don't let that fool you. He's got some fight left. Believe me, I spar with him all the time. The mental image of Gemma going up against Triton made me smile. That would be a sight to see. Gemma caught the smile and returned one of her own. How about you, Nick? She asked. You've been very quiet. How about I what? I blinked. Who's your favorite superhero? I hesitated, wondering if I was going to be honest or not, but Matt's snort of derision behind me, no doubt prepared to bring up bad blood yet again, convinced me to be utterly honest. Well, you are, I said, simply. This was news to Gemma, whose brows lifted up into her hairline. Me? I haven't done anything. Why me? Most of the class were floored by her utter humility. If you asked anyone on the street what Amazoness had done, the list would be long indeed. For me, though, what she had done was plain and simple. You saved me from the island, remember? Oh. She leaned back against her desk, eyes off in distant memory. Triton and I were both on that mission. He pulled just as much weight as I did, you know. Well, yeah, but you checked in more than he did, I pointed out. Besides, I really like your power set. Growing to the size of a building has got to be really useful. Can't imagine many villains would be willing to pick a fight with you when you can just stomp on them. Ha! Gemma shook her head and chuckled. The rest of the class followed along, though Matt was still stubbornly silent at the back. I ignored him. It's true, she admitted. I really like that part. Gemma and I locked eyes, and I held them while I remembered the rescue from years ago. Much of it was a haze of running and panic, but I remembered her warm insistence that everything was going to be all right. At the time, I wasn't certain I believed her. I wasn't even certain I wanted to leave, but it turned out to be true. Later on, I was thankful they'd both come for me. I don't know what I'd be if you never came for me, Gemma, I said before correcting myself. Miss Corcoran. It's all right, she said with a wave of her hand. You can call me Gemma if that's easier. Right, I nodded gratefully. Well, I don't know what I'd be if you didn't give me a chance. I mean, I haven't robbed a bank or anything like that, but you were just a child, Nick. We saved you because you deserved better. Gemma shot a clear, hard stare at Matt and Kristen. You still do. I ducked my head as my cheeks flushed a little. Yeah, well, I'm grateful, that's all I'm saying. She smiled back, her expression tender. Hey, no thanks necessary. That's what heroes do. Chapter 6. Andy and Kara traded corny knock-knock jokes back and forth as the three of us headed toward the expansive gym where a large portion of the tryouts had occurred earlier that week. The two painted a pretty picture as they leaned into one another, their blonde and red hair splashing together when Kara leaned her head on Andy's shoulder. I hadn't known Kara to be affectionate, as a general rule, but Andy had a magnetism about her that was impossible to ignore. I smiled every time Andy made Kara laugh because it was a sound that seemed too rare from the upbeat girl I remembered from years ago. Given the way Andy kept trying to tease it out of her, I suspected that she more or less agreed with the sentiment. Okay, Andy huffed as she waved her hands out in front of her in a plea of mercy. Last one. Knock knock. Kara giggled, a sweet little sound that could probably melt even Icebringer's heart. Who's there? Her cheeks were flushed with mirth, and her blue eyes glistened as they looked Andy up and down, as if trying to determine where she was hiding the pun this time.
Robin,
Andy answered with a grin. Robin who? The blonde stuck her finger out like a gun and clicked with her teeth to imitate pulling back the hammer.
Robin, you. Now hand over the cash.
Kara's laugh bubbled over again, and she held up her hands in mock surrender. Her shoulders shook while she tried and failed to contain her giggles. Help! I'm being accosted by a stretchy blonde madwoman.
Seems like you're flat broke, kid. I'll take a hug instead.
Andy's arm wrapped around Kara twice and yanked her close for a friendly, one-armed hug. The moment Kara was free, she flew at Andy with her hands held high. Take two. I've got some to spare. She wrapped herself around Andy's neck, and the two hugged it out in full. I smiled at Andy's little noise of surprise as her eyes softened to a darker shade of amber. She sniffed Kara's hair, then pulled back with a smirk.
Someone's using that new shampoo I got the other day. Lavender, eh?
Kara flushed hot crimson, and she peeled back from Andy. I saw your name on it and couldn't help but sample some. It's quite a nice choice. She darted a glance my way and then blushed even deeper. Andy whispered something into her ear, and it was about that moment I saw Kara die of embarrassment. She put a hand over her face and shook her head. It's not like that, she whined. I lifted a brow in confusion. Not like what?
Oh, nothing,
Andy grinned. She tossed an arm over Kara's shoulder and pulled her close again.
Now, there's nothing to be ashamed of, my little strawberry.
Kara whined again, the sound amusing and not at all serious this time. I don't get it. I rolled my eyes, unsure what the hell they were going on about. Andy's pity must have extended to me, because she looped an arm around my shoulders as well.
Word on the street is that lavender is one of your favorite scents, she explained. I suspect Kara wanted to see if you'd notice.
I lifted a brow at that and darted a glance between the two of them. Kara's hands were still covering her face, which was so hot at this point that she'd probably burst into flames if we kept going. Word on the street? I repeated with an arched eyebrow.
Yeah.
Andy tossed a shoulder as her grin grew a little shark-like.
You're a popular guy in the girls' dorm, Nick. There are all sorts of theories floating around.
Well, that was news to me. Andy was one thing, but an entire dorm? I flushed about as red as Kara and ducked my head at the way Andy roved her eyes all over me. I loved the attention, of course, but I wasn't sure what to do about it yet. She was a bright, burning star, and I was just one man focused on making it through the day without an Inferno reference. She pecked me on the cheek, and I swear my skin sizzled when her lips made contact.
You're both cute when you're flustered.
Knock, knock, I huffed as I tried to ignore the feeling of my insides bursting into a million butterflies. Who's there? It was Kara who answered after clearing her throat. The blush had dimmed somewhat, but she kept darting glances my way like she couldn't take her eyes off me. That was new as well. Nice, but new. Howl, I said. Andy snorted. Howl who? She must be great at puns because her tone suggested she knew exactly where the joke was going. How will you know unless you open the door? It was endearing, the way Kara found these toddler-sized jokes to be funny. She burst out laughing again and then cut her hand in front of her as a show of mercy. Andy and I laughed with her, pleased to see the mirth that made her pretty blue eyes glisten.
Your laugh is like a ray of sunshine,
Andy cooed to her.
I'll find a way to make sure you laugh forever.
That'd be terrible. Kara shook her head, though she snickered just a little more at the notion.
Being happy forever?
Andy released her arm around Kara to lay her head on her forehead and toss her head back like a fainting Victorian maiden. Oh, what a cruel fate! With that, the three of us walked through the heavy wooden doors of the gym together, only to be greeted immediately by Brad. He seemed to be waiting with a hand on either hip and a jealous glint in his eyes as his gaze bounced between myself and the two girls. He settled on Kara specifically, and a thick tongue curled in his mouth while he looked her up and down. Even I felt the slime of that gaze. Kara ducked backward, a troubled wrinkle between her brows, and I stepped out in front of her and crossed my arms. "The fuck's your problem, O'Connor?" I glared at him.
Touchy today.
Brad raked his gaze over Andy next, but she flipped him off in response. He chortled and leaned back on his heel. He crossed his arms to mimic me, sarcasm dripping in the pose.
Wasn't waiting for you, Junior Overlord, but the sight is a pleasant one. Care to share?
Andy roughly shoved Brad aside as she walked past him, and Brad sniffed the air like a hound after a tantalizing meal. He tried to slap Kara's behind when we passed him as well, but I caught his wrist and immediately twisted it behind his back. I slammed him against the heavy doors and used leverage to threaten a break.
Ow, ow, ow!
Brad howled.
The fuck, man?
I heard Kara's soft curse behind me. My tone was low and soft in his ear. You ever do that again, and I'll break every bone in your fucking body, Brad. You've got 206 of them, so I can start now if you really want to be a shit.
Fuck you, man,
he yelled back in a vain effort to sound tougher than he was.
Jesus.
I sighed as I rolled my eyes at the back of his head. He won't help you now, I'm afraid. Say, what did you call me? Junior Overlord? You know, my dad would probably take this hand clean off for acting the way you did. Well, after dousing you in hellfire for a few minutes. Me, I just want to break something. How about this arm for a start? I wrenched it a little just to make a point. Brad squealed like the pig he was.
Okay. Fucking hell. You're such a dick. Let me go.
I was certain City Master was watching from somewhere in the gym, but I didn't care at this point. I wrenched Brad's arm again, and he whimpered in utter terror. Oh, I'm not done with you, Mr. O'Connor. I yanked him back from the wall and twisted him around so that we were both looking at the two girls. He was still pinned with a leverage hold, and I threatened him again silently. A brief tug just to make sure he was paying very close attention. Kara had her hand over her mouth in shock. It was the first time she'd ever seen me violent. Andy had a comforting arm around her, though it was clear by her little smile that she approved of the turn of events. She stuck her hand on her hip and gestured at Brad with a swirling hand of impatience.
Well, what? Ow!
Brad sounded addled from the pain. Maybe he'd never actually been hurt before.
Fucking hell, what do you want from me, Gadion?
Apologize, you thick-headed bastard, I growled in his ear.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
He started to panic, sucking in huge breaths of air.
Jesus fucking...
Andy sighed and then pretended to examine her nails.
Sometime today will be very nice, Brad. Class is going to start any minute.
Sorry, he stammered at last.
Very, very sorry.
Andy gestured to Kara and then cupped her ear, eyes wide.
What was that? I don't think she heard you.
I added an extra twist to hurry the point along.
Ugh, sorry,
Brad howled.
I said I'm sorry, Kara. I'll never do it again. I fucking promise.
Kara paled, not at all happy with the sudden attention. She shook her head and took a step backward.
That's okay, Brad. It's not okay,
Andy interrupted and then pulled her in close for another hug.
Don't waste your time appeasing shitheads like this. You're worth more than that.
I nodded and tugged at Brad's arm again. Next time you see these girls, you greet them with respect, or you'll be on your knees. I'll break your legs, to be sure.
Fuck you, Gadion,
he spat. For someone who was supposed to be smart, it was a dumb thing to say, considering his position.
You'll be expelled if you keep this up. You can't just boss your way around us.
I slammed him against the wall again, and this time I made sure he hit his head pretty hard. Not actually enough to concuss him, but enough that he'd have a headache for the next few hours. You think Matt's gonna save you, you disgusting pig? I snarled in his ear, done with his bullshit. He's got a sister. Cares about her more than anything. You start acting like an ass around every woman you see, you won't have many friends. I held on for another long moment, just to make sure the point was drilled into his meaty, thick skull. Then I let go, and Brad, his face crimson with humiliated tears in his eyes, opened the door and ran right out of it. I was tempted to catcall after him, but held back. There wasn't a point in reducing myself to his level.
Skipping the first day of class isn't going to look good on his record,
Andy scoffed.
But fuck him. Thanks, Nick.
I rubbed at the back of my head, immediately uncertain, when my eyes fell on Kara's timid posture, half hiding behind Andy. I had scared her. I definitely scared her. I'm sorry, Kara. I began, but she cut me off.
No,
Kara squeaked.
Don't.
Panic almost set in, and I immediately glanced at the door and considered running too. Maybe I should have let it go. I was too violent, too much like my... That's when Kara closed the distance between us and took my hands in hers. She looked up at me with loving, ice blue eyes, and I felt the world snap back into place again.
Hey, stop that,
she whispered, a little more confident now.
I'm not made of glass, you know. I've never had anyone do that for me before. It was very sweet. Thank you.
I glanced from her to Andy and back again. Right. You're welcome. It was no trouble. Those incredible blue eyes were soft and kind, loving in every possible way. I didn't know what I'd done to deserve them. She could have taken care of Brad herself if push came to shove. Kara's hands were warm in mine, and I cleared my throat. I know you can defend yourself, I went on, still a bit annoyed about Brad's lack of maturity. I didn't mean to take away from that, but you both deserve better, and I'll be damned if he tries that ever again. I don't care, I'll snap his goddamn... My thoughts shattered when Kara kissed me on the cheek. It was a sweet and gentle thing, her lips gone before I fully registered the action. I blinked at her and struggled for words.
Thank you, Nick.
Right. Well, it's hard to be threatening when you do that, I joked. She pulled away, and her warmth lingered behind. My hands tingled where she'd taken them a moment ago. I held one to my cheek and traced a finger where she kissed me. It was the first one we'd shared in any sense since, well, it had been a very long time. Chapter 7. Suddenly chipper and confident with that one simple action, Kara walked onward. She waved at City Master, who was looking at us from a platform near some other mysterious door. He'd clearly witnessed the entire exchange and had done nothing about it. Hard to say if that meant he approved. It could also mean he was harboring his judgments for later. Andy's hand slipped into mine while we both followed Kara to the gathering class. "Thanks for being you," she said quietly. "I chose well." I chuckled softly, rolling my eyes at her. "You keep saying that." "Because it's true," she smiled. It was a faint little thing, marred only by a slight tone of unhappiness. "Kara doesn't talk about it, but she's suffered a lot. It's in her eyes." "I think we both did," I said and nodded. "She's the same girl she was before, but a little quieter now. She was never really the same after Mom died, you know? And when I fell out of contact, I guess she thought I'd be mad." "She'll recover. She's already started to bloom," Andy said with confidence. "In the meantime, her self-worth could use a buffer. It does a girl a lot of good to know that she has friends who will have her back. So, thanks." I nudged her with my shoulder and smiled again. "Thanks yourself." I glanced back toward the heavy wooden doors as they swung open for the Barber twins and Jack. Brad was hiding behind his brick-lading comrade, and Matt looked about ready to murder me. No doubt Brad had spun some kind of lie just to get his vengeance. I tipped my chin toward them to show Andy. She whistled softly. "There goes the hope he was gonna go cry in the bathroom for the next few hours." I sighed and joined Kara, who was waiting with Eric and the other students for City Master to begin his lesson. There was a light shining on the big black door behind him, and most were glancing at it, curious to its nature. When he saw me, Eric squirmed through the crowd of classmates and gave me a wave. Kara followed him and flashed a little smile my way. "Nick, look!" Eric gestured at the door with both hands, a look of wonder all over his face. "Rescue class!" He was bouncing on the balls of his feet, so excited that I could see little sparks race along the blue streaks of his hair. He tried to high-five me, but I saw sparks running along his hand as well, and darted out of the way with a grimace. "Sorry, man," I said with a nod to those sparks, "but you're, well, at full charge." "Yeah, you're pretty pumped today," Andy said with a laugh. Eric shook his hand to try to stop the sparks, but they continued on without him. He grimaced as well, but that didn't hold his attention for long. Bouncing again, he jabbed a finger toward the mystery door a second time. "Sorry, Nick," he said as he bounced. "So, what do you think's behind the door? Maybe another obstacle course? Who are we rescuing? You know, in Heroes Unlimited Edition 105, there was this really interesting case where Judgment saved someone with a fork. Like, just a fork. No powers, no..." "That's fascinating stuff," I interrupted him and chuckled a little. I gently clapped Eric on the back to let him know that I wasn't trying to be a jerk. A small spark connected with my hand when I did, and I winced at the feeling of electricity jolting through my fingers. All things considered, Eric was fantastic company. He was just a real handful sometimes. "Did you practice those meditation techniques we talked about?" I added. "You're sparkling more than Brad's personality." Eric rolled his eyes. "Yeah, Mom, and I made a ton of progress. But seriously, Nick, aren't you even a little curious about the fork? It's awesome!" "Focus, young Padawan." Being the only guy in the male dorm who actually didn't mind my company, Eric and I had ended up spending quite a bit of time together this first week at Volcav. I decided that if he was going to be even a junior member of our current team, he really needed to work on his powers a bit more, and so I suggested meditation to help him out. It had worked for me initially while gaining better control over my own, and seemed a great idea at the time. But getting Eric to focus on anything for more than 2 to 3 minutes was a real challenge. He didn't really understand the concept of inner peace either. Eric rolled his eyes again and snarked,
"Yes, Master Gadion."
He sucked in a great big breath, held it for a second, then released. The sparks were still dancing all over his body. He bounced on the balls of his feet again.
"Better?"
I laughed and shook my head. "Not even the slightest. You're hopeless, buddy." Eric closed his eyes and tried again. It was like watching a little boy try to contain the excitement before Christmas morning, and Eric peeked out of the door again, his whole body vibrating with anticipation. Andy snickered and joined Kara and me where we waited by the platform. From it, City Master towered above us like a monolith, silent and stoic. He steepled his fingers, took a deep breath, then scanned the classroom with dark eyes. They fell on me the same amount of time as everyone else. I was quite happy with this, to be perfectly honest. It was nice to know at least one of the faculty was willing to treat me as an equal. At long last, he opened his mouth to speak.
"Today, you'll begin your physical training into the complicated endeavor that is a rescue. As each of you knows, rescues by their nature are unpredictable, and the villains involved in them are even more so."
He paused on someone behind me as he said this. I heard the grind of Jack's bricks and suspected it had to do with someone in Matt's group.
"If you are performing a rescue, you are delving deep into enemy territory," he continued. "The villain knows the battlefield and has often set traps in anticipation of you. Unless they are able to scout ahead, the only thing a hero knows going in is the stakes. An innocent life on the line, and a villain willing to play with murder just to catch your attention."
City Master held up a finger, his expression thoughtful.
"But why? Why bother taunting the hero in the first place?"
The class was silent, and City Master sighed. He gestured at all of us with an eye roll.
"That was a question you were supposed to answer."
It was Brad, still hiding behind Jack, who raised his hand. We all turned to look at him when City Master gestured him to speak.
"The fuck with the hero,"
he said, glaring at me again.
"It's psychological warfare."
I couldn't help but snort a little and nudged Andy with my shoulder. She shared the same expression. Brad would know the answer to this one.
"Indeed, Mr. O'Connor."
City Master tapped his own head.
"Psychological warfare. Sometimes, many times in fact, a villain doesn't care about being arrested. Sometimes they're so far gone they only care about the moment. They want to see you burn, and to do that, they'll go straight for your spirit. They'll try to break it."
He gestured off to his left, where the door still waited.
"Each time you enter, the course will be different, and set up into scenarios that match real-world occurrences with similar stakes. Unpredictability is a factor here, because it is a factor in the real world."
City Master then swept an arm over at us.
"In each scenario, one of you will play the hero and try to rescue our victim. The other will play the villain and attempt to stop them. Then the roles shall be reversed. You will be scored on both attempts. The villain enters first and has a 5-minute grace period. The hero must navigate whatever traps the villain chooses to set, and then rescue the victim wherever they are. Combat is not necessary. This isn't a battle sequence, this is a rescue class. Your priority is a life in danger."
He clapped his hands once and looked us over again. His eyes settled on me this time.
"Mr. Gation, you're fighting Mr. Barber. Gation, you'll be playing villain first."
Andy nudged me with her shoulder.
"You've got this, Nick. Kick his ass."
On my other side, Kara smiled by way of support. I wasn't happy to play the villain whatsoever, but City Master continued his roll call without waiting for protests. Andy would be fighting Kara, and Eric would be fighting Kristen. Oddly enough, Jack would be fighting Brad, which was strange given their vastly different power sets. Kara and Andy were one thing, but Jack was about as opposite as one could get to Brad. The setup didn't seem exclusive to supportive versus offensive power sets, which meant this really wasn't a combat course. It was generally considered bad taste to pit supportive against offensive types in combat scenarios, because offensive types usually had an unfair advantage. The two were generally meant to complement each other.
"All right, Gation," City Master urged. "Through the door. Formulate a plan and make it quick. The timer starts when Mr. Barber walks in after you."
Walking through the door was like walking into an entirely different world. It was an apartment or a house of some kind. A glance out the window told me we were on the ground floor, but that couldn't be right. The layout didn't make sense, given the scale of the gym behind me. Illusions, maybe? But everything felt real enough. I traced my fingers along the fabric of a modern black couch. It sat before a small plasma television and a matte black coffee table laden with various knickknacks. The house ran down a hall to what seemed to be bedrooms. When I explored a door on the left, I found a kitchen area with pots and pans waiting on a cold stove. There was another door to the back of the house, or what I assumed to be a house. I was trying to rationalize the space in my brain, but nothing about it made any sense. The backyard lawn was a crisp emerald green, too green, and the sun that shone down on me had an odd lack of warmth about it. Illusions, then. Were Mindbender and City Master working together on this one? I heard a southern drawl and my eyes darted upward. "Hey there, Sugar Plum." Dangling from a 3-story drop was Adelaide, tied by a thick rope. It connected to the roof of an imposing steel building. I knew in my head that it was all a trick and Adelaide wasn't actually in serious danger, but still, my heart skipped a beat when I saw her. "Are you okay up there?" I called out. "Don't mind me, sweetie," she cooed. "You focus on your task now, you hear?" Upon closer inspection, I found various levers and switches hidden around the place. When I tested them, I was surprised to discover that many triggered traps that were terrifying in nature and likely lethal to anyone but Matt himself. There were ones that spit fire, blades, even poison at the intruder. It'd make sense that City Master would adjust the traps based on the rescuer's abilities, and Matt did have a healing factor that had yet to be truly tested. From what I'd seen thus far, he could brute force his way through nearly anything with enough persistence, and he certainly didn't lack in the stubbornness department. But if he was ever going to improve on the field, he needed to learn his limits. Matt might hate me with all the rage of a dying star, but he was Icebringer's son. I knew potential when I saw it. I didn't plan on going easy with him. When Matt finally entered, I waited by the television near the entrance with my arms crossed. He scowled and marched toward me with his claws extended, paying attention to nothing else. It was the first mistake of many to come. The false bottom to the floor was obvious if he'd bothered to glance down, but he fell victim to his own anger once again. He was nothing if not predictable. With a surprised shriek, he tumbled down a 10-foot drop and then screamed in pain. Concerned, I peered over the edge of the trap. At first, I wasn't going to add the spikes down there, but Matt's relentless attack on my character was getting very old, and there was a tiny part of me that wanted him to suffer just a little bit. When I found him impaled through the shoulder at the bottom of the pit, I couldn't help but smile a tiny bit. "You fucking coward," he snarled as he thrashed wildly. "First you attack Brad and..."
He groaned in pain as he attempted to free himself from the spike. The metal was slick with his blood, and he seemed to be stuck. And now this. They might think you're playing, but I know you're evil. I know it. You're only here to take your education back to Inferno Island and serve your father like the bitch you are.
I ignored his struggling at the bottom of the pit and placed my hand on the switch that would free him. With a cold, dead tone, I asked, "Do you even know how long I spent there, Matt?" I didn't wait for him to answer that. 10 very long, very instructive years. You know nothing about what I'm capable of, and even less about what he would do in my place.
You fucking impaled me. I'd say that's evidence enough.
And yet, you're still talking, I shrugged. Maybe I should have cut your tongue out first. It'd grow back, so I'm sure City Master wouldn't mind. I'm tired of hearing your incessant whining.
Fuck you, Nick.
If it were my father, he'd have filled that pit with acid and then blocked your exit with a force field. That's probably a weakness for you, if you're wondering. Strong, steady damage to counteract your healing factor. If it's caustic enough, it might even kill you. You'd die slowly, and he'd take notes to the music of your screams. From the pit, I heard,
"You're disgusting."
And yet I still grant you mercy. Weird how that works. I hit the switch on the wall, and I heard metal slide back as the spikes retracted. Matt groaned in relief. Slowly, the platform rose to free him. Matt didn't wait for it. He used his claws to gouge furrows into the stone walls of the pit, and soon climbed out of it with a vicious snarl. I rolled into the kitchen and snatched a carving knife from the counter. I held it and waited for him to charge at me, as was his pattern. The back door behind me was wide open, revealing a bright, sunny day in stark contrast to the tension inside the house. Matt was still very bloody from the spike, but his shoulder seemed completely healed now.
"You're not gonna survive the year's end, Nick."
Matt's voice was guttural. He was becoming more and more the beast, and less the man.
"I'm gonna find a way to make you disappear."
Ah. I clicked my tongue and granted him an amused little grin. It was only half fake because I knew he'd say that. He was getting too predictable. Listen to those shallow little threats, all that posturing. What a brave boy you are. I tapped my chin with my free hand, wide-eyed and mocking. Wait a minute. Is this the part where you charge at me and bumble right into the next trap? Sure enough, he snarled and did exactly that. I rolled toward him, easily avoiding the blow. As Matt missed me, he tumbled through the back door, tripping wires which sent huge volts of electricity into his body. He screamed in pain and writhed in the grass like a wild animal. I let him suffer for a few seconds, but again, I eventually freed him from the wires with another switch, and they retracted back into the house as if they'd never existed. I chuckled at the way he rose from the ground on trembling knees. His glare could melt steel, but I was beyond caring now. I put a hand on my hip and gestured at him with the kitchen knife. See, that time I actually warned you, and yet you still fell right into it. You only have yourself to blame, you know. I shrugged.
"I hate you."
Yes, I got that part. I gestured back towards the door, tisking with a click of my tongue. Listen, sweetie, that's 2 times I let you go. You're gonna have to start putting in some effort, because any more freebies and my grade will suffer. Matt wiped his chin with the back of his wrist and stood a little more steadily on his feet.
"You're only freeing me from the traps to make yourself look benevolent,"
he spat.
"That's what you do. You're a manipulative fuckhead."
He'd already completely recovered. If he weren't such a stubborn pain in the ass, I'd be impressed. It was amazing how quickly he could heal from nearly anything. Manipulative, huh? I glanced up at the building where Adelaide had been dangled before. I had moved her into the building itself, where she'd be more comfortable. I knew Matt would waste a lot of time fighting against me. I gestured at the building and lifted a mocking brow at him. Aren't you gonna go save your damsel? You seem to be a little distracted. Matt swore as he finally remembered his original purpose and turned from me to run across the street. I held back a smile, happy to know that despite the tension between us and the lengths I had to go to play this role, he really was learning. Assuming he could get over himself and see beyond the surface layers, he'd become a fantastic hero. But it was a tall order. I raced in behind him, and despite being unpowered, I was faster than he was. I cut in front of him in the middle of the road, and then shoved him back so he fell on his ass. He snarled at me again, and his eyes were an angry, golden hue. He did that when he turned, embracing more and more of the beast within him. I'd yet to see him go completely werewolf. He always maintained some portion of humanity, even when he was furious, but I suspected that at his full potential, he was an absolute monster. Even now, it seemed to be a struggle for him to keep it under control, and I decided to poke the beast, to test just how strenuous that control really was. If it broke this easily, he was in for a rude awakening when a real villain tested his patience. If you're so brave and righteous, why do you spend your time with a prick like Brad? I asked. The dude can't even understand the concept of saving innocent lives. Sure enough, Matt swung at me with one of his claws, and I easily dodged out of the way. He was a very emotional creature, and in a way much like the wolf that he emulated. Dogs were loyal to their pack, and so was he. Too bad he didn't think about much else. I dodged his next attack easily enough, and then shrugged at him. I've seen him eyeballing the girls as they leave their dorm, I went on, and Matt tried to hit me again, but I sidestepped out of the way. He was far too easy to avoid. I kept talking like nothing had happened, and this only pissed him off even more. He catcalls them, whistles to them, tries to slap their asses like the alpha male douche that he is. You better keep a watch, or he'll try it on Kristen soon, and she will actually kill him. I know danger when I see it. You leave my sister out of this, Matt roared. He dove at me, and this time, instead of dodging, I kicked him hard in the gut. As he fell and buckled forward, I stabbed him in the chest with the knife. I missed his heart by an inch, but that was on purpose. I wasn't sure if it would kill him or not. When he struggled, I twisted the knife just to fuck with him. He screamed in response and tried to jostle me off, but I pulled the knife out on my own and rolled away from him. You don't want to hear this, but I don't actually hate you, I remarked as I examined Matt's blood on the knife. It was a pretty dark crimson and already coagulating. I bet his blood could do a lot of good in the medical field. You can do better than Brad. Your sister can too. Matt's snarl was guttural again. I said leave my sister. Yes, I know what you said, Matt. Isn't it pathetic how I can just keep distracting you so easily? You really do need to work on your focus a bit more. It's been, 5 minutes? Your rescue score is going to be abhorrent. I tisked and waggled a disapproving finger at him. Daddy Judgment will be so disappointed. Paling a bit at that, Matt checked his watch and then cursed. He burst through the large front windows of the building and ended up in an empty lobby. I followed behind. Matt was at least trying to learn, and he ran instead of taking my bait when I wolf whistled at him. This time he ran for the stairs and climbed up them very quickly. He nearly fell for a bear trap, but caught the wire just in time and jumped over it instead. I was never going to tell him, but I was actually very proud of that. Somewhere in that big, dumb head of his was a guy with a big heart and a lot of potential. He found Adelaide's room quickly enough, when Adelaide responded to his shouts with a southern, "Help! Oh, help me, brave hero!" I cracked a smile from behind Matt because she was so ridiculous, and I loved her for it. Matt didn't try the knob, likely suspecting another trap. Instead, he kicked the door open, and it slammed into the wall with a loud bang. Adelaide was placed in a comfortable chair by a window that overlooked the street. Likely she'd witnessed the fight between Matt and me. There was a bomb strapped to her waist, and it beeped slow and steady. A bright red light winked in and out, warning about the impending danger. She didn't seem the slightest bit concerned about it, and instead beamed at Matt with bright, happy eyes. "Oh, my precious hero, you came!" I fished the bomb's trigger from my pocket. Matt looked from me to the bomb, then to the trigger with a noise of disgust.
A bomb? You've crossed the line, Nick. This is going too far.
Have I? He gestured angrily.
A bomb!
I shrugged at him and pretended to look bored. "And what are you going to do about it, hero?" For a long moment, Matt did nothing. It was clear he wasn't sure if he should gamble on me pulling the trigger or go for Adelaide and risk blowing her up. I sighed in irritation when I could smell his little brain burning. "Matt, please, just rescue her. It's not that hard." He was a broken record now and shouted again,
"It's a bomb!"
"Yeah, and?"
A bomb!"
I rolled my eyes. "For God's sake." I threw the detonator away and his eyes grew wide as golf balls. "It's not a real bomb, you dumbass. Go on, save her. Time's ticking." Matt didn't move.
"What do you mean, save her? You're supposed to..."
"I'm tired of this," I sighed. 10 minutes. You wasted 10 minutes, Matt. Just end it. Tentatively, Matt crossed the room and pulled at the bomb vest like it was a poisonous snake. He looked comical, terrified that he was going to blow up at any second. I sighed and crossed my arms. "I'm not actually evil, you know. That's in your head." He snorted, clearly thinking otherwise. "And if you're wondering, you could have used the door to stun me," I told him. "Or you could have noticed her in the window to start with. The bomb was obvious even down at the street. It's got a big red fucking light on it. And even if you didn't, you could have wrestled me for it. A bomb that big would have taken the whole building, and I'm a lot of things, but suicidal isn't one of them. It was a threat. You get your hands on the trigger, she's safe anyway. The one time you could have fought me, you didn't, and the many times you shouldn't have, you did. You're a mess, Matt. Get your shit together."
"Fuck you, Nick."
I rolled my eyes. Yes, fuck me," I gestured. "Got a fetish or something?" For once, Matt ignored the bait. He freed Adelaide and she hugged him tightly. His cheeks burned when she kissed him on the cheek. "My hero," she cheered. When we returned to the gym, City Master cornered us both. He had his arms crossed, a grumpy line etched between his brows. Behind him, Kara and Andy were displayed on a large screen, currently taunting one another in their own match beyond the door. Andy was in the middle of an evil cackle, her laugh wide and obnoxious, like something out of a cartoon. I couldn't help but chuckle.
"Horrid display, Barber," City Master tisked disapprovingly. "If you ever want to be named a hero, start acting like one. This isn't about your little vendetta or your familial problems. It's about the innocent up in that tower. You let your emotions control you out in the field like that, and people will die for it. You let yourself be manipulated far too easily, and if it were a real situation, Adelaide would have died up there. Get over yourself and get out of here.
Matt roughly shoved me with an arm as he stormed by, and I shoved him back. City Master sighed and rolled his eyes.
Deal with your garbage later, he said. You're both up again soon. Roll reversal this time.
I started to walk away when City Master called me back.
And Nick, good job.
Kara won her match against Andy, and Eric won his against Kristen. Jack won against Brad, who couldn't seem to understand that the idea was to rescue Adelaide and not try to brute force his way past a man that was quite literally a walking brick wall. With that, it was time for my second round with Matt. The idea of being the villain made my gut roil for obvious reasons, even though I did an okay job. Now that I was the hero, I was really looking forward to this exercise. After Matt headed in to set the traps, Andy pulled me into a quiet corner away from the others and smiled. Her hand was warm in mine.
"I've been meaning to ask, Nick," she said firmly. "You interested in a date?"
That was Andy, utterly blunt with no fear and no regrets. I respected the way she went after the things she wanted in life, and I wish I had half as much courage to do the same. I smiled back as my heart fluttered for a moment. I wasn't feeling very confident, but she inspired me to try. "You trying to seduce me, Andrea Baker?" I quipped. She chuckled